Thank you very much. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is follow the same format and welcome Professor Jane Pritchard to come and introduce our second inaugural lecturer this evening. Jay, over to you. Thank you.
Afternoon to the second shift. Thank you very much for joining us. It's my very great pleasure to introduce our colleague, Pete Worsley, Professor of Assistive Technology and Tissue Health. Struggled over that word late in the day on a Friday. Pete's been absolutely one to watch since he arrived at the University of Southampton at the very start of his career. Completing his undergraduate degree in physiotherapy in 2007, where I'm told he shone academically whilst also managing to spend a good bit of time on the rugby field, and also, perhaps not unlike many undergraduates, also in the pub, I hear. On completion of his degree, Pete started to work with Professor Maria Stokes, who I'm delighted to say is here with us today, during which time he developed techniques to progress our understanding of knee osteoarthritis, completing his PhD in the field in 2011. And he secured his first permanent position as lecturer in the School of Health Sciences in 2016. His rise to professor has been rapid, with promotion to associate professor in 2020 and to professor in 2023. I think it's really important to point out that Pete's contribution across the school is a really solid embodiment of our triple helix approach, where he not only demonstrates excellence through his research leadership, and we'll be hearing a lot about that, but also to education through our prestigious physiotherapy program and through his knowledge exchange and enterprise activity. During his time at Southampton, Pete has gone on to develop a national and international reputation as an expert in the field of bioengineering technologies and to support skin health. And his work has been recognised by several awards across his career. His programme of research has led to an impressive body of high-quality research outputs and generated new knowledge, which is genuinely and directly impacting on patient care. Through his work, he's built a team of multidisciplinary researchers and rebranded and developed the Skin Sensing Research Group, which he co-leads with Davide Fingeri, who's also present today. He collaborates extensively with industrial partners, testing and developing medical device innovations. And with colleagues in the Faculty of Engineering, in 2020, he successfully spun out a company, Radi Devices, which provides cutting-edge technologies to support medical design in prosthetics and orthotics. Throughout his rapid rise to becoming professor, Pete is widely acknowledged by those that work with him to have maintained his humility and a focus on shaping and bringing others with him. He's also a very good person to have around in an emergency, as evidenced by the very presence of some in this room today. His interest in developing others shines through in the way that he leads his vibrant team, and he's an exceptional role model for all those that work with him and who follow behind him. It is a real privilege to invite Pete to come forward and present his inaugural lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Pete Worsley.
Thank you, friends, family, colleagues, everyone that's stuck around on a sunny Friday evening. It's very much appreciated, and to anyone online as well. I'm going to give a bit of a potted history of where it all started and how things have sort of emerged in terms of an academic career, but hopefully highlight some of the great luck that I've had with the people that I've worked with, and the colleagues that I currently share a wonderful academic life with. And I probably need to explain to everyone, particularly my parents, that the fact I came to university in 2004 and never left. So most of my friends say, Pete, what are you still doing at uni? So to reassure mum and dad, I do now get paid to be here. This isn't just me being a student forever. And so my work is wonderfully varied. So I have the great pleasure of doing research, or still getting to do a bit of research within my career. I get to teach on the most fantastic physiotherapy program, working with a fantastic group of students. And I get a huge buzz from the education side of my work. I do lots of work sharing knowledge and exchanging ideas with lots of different people. So charities, industry, third sector organizations, sharing ideas, helping them to develop their own research interests. And I take a huge pleasure from working with, managing and collaborating with others. And that's just a massive part of my week in, week out work. And actually having all those four things in a career, I sat on a train the other day with a friend who I went to university with, and we hadn't seen each other for 15 years. And he said, I'm stuck in a job in an insurance company in London, and I hate my job. And he said, what would you do if you could do anything else? And I said, well, I'm already in my perfect job. So I really lucked out with being able to do all these things in my career. But like most good things in my life, it all started with a night out. And I'm very pleased to say that some of those characters in that photo, Jodie and Adam, are here today. Because actually these are friends that I made during my physiotherapy undergrad. And 20 years later, we are still hanging out with each other. So thank you both. And it was one of the very few nights out I had, Mum and Dad, where perhaps we had overdone it a little bit. And as a result of overdoing it, I was actually late to pick my research project. So I had to pick the last project that was left. And to my great luck again, that just so happened to be a project looking at ultrasound imaging. So I always thought ultrasound, oh, that's the thing that you stuck onto the tummy of pregnant women to find out how the baby's growing. And actually, Maria opened my eyes to ultrasound being used in lots of different ways. So we can characterize the health and the status of muscles. We can measure how big they are. We can look to see if your muscles on an injured knee might be smaller than, say, or larger than your unaffected side. And I started to explore a few different things in ultrasound imaging. So can we use different types of ultrasound probes, and do they measure things just as accurately as each other? Can we do ultrasound reliably? And when we do measure muscles, do they change when we contract them? And perhaps the biggest lesson here was, gosh, I'm going to have to really sort myself out because I'm working with some incredibly serious academics. Professor Maria Stokes and Dr. Martin Warner. Time to pull up my sleeves and work hard at university. However, little did I know that Maria and Martin were the original Hellraisers. This is Professor Stokes in Australia, I think doing her postdoc at the time, standing on the tables and drinking everyone under the table, but teaching some very good lessons in life that actually research can be fun and that you should celebrate doing research with your colleagues. And of course, my other colleague, Martin Warner, who also had a second job as a DJ at the local nightclub where I used to hang out on the weekends. So researchers can be cool, right? So I thought, well, this is fantastic. But it gave me that initial kind of interest in research. And that's why I think it's so important that during our undergrad that we offer here in Southampton, that we engage our student body in research projects and give them that taste of what it's like to do research, because that's what bit the bug for me. And of course, Maria being Maria, after I did my undergrad with her, collared my parents and said, Peter must do a PhD fairly soon after he graduates. And so luckily for Maria had lined up a PhD with my good friend and colleague, Professor Mark Taylor, who's now in Flinders, and this fine character here, David Barrett, who's a consultant orthopedic surgeon and a professor at the university. And so we had a bioengineer, a physio, and an orthopedic surgeon all working together on an interdisciplinary project. And we wanted to find out what determines someone's functional recovery after knee replacements. And I was very fortunate to have funding from a company and from the Engineering Research Council, and we designed the PhD in such a way that I could continue to work in clinical practice. So I was getting the best of both worlds. And what the PhD entailed is lots of this sort of stuff. So we have a biomechanics lab here at the university, and we could stick some sensors onto the skin, and we could measure how people move and what muscles were active and when. And bless my mum, she even got the shorts out and acted as my healthy control. And I stuck the markers on mum and dad as well. So thank you both for being part of my healthy control group. But we're starting to learn about how people move before the operation and then how people move after a knee replacement. And what we then ended up doing is transforming some of those models into these inverse dynamic models. So these are basically taking that motion data, putting it into a computer simulation, and then we can work out how much force is going through those joints and how hard the muscles need to work to get there. And I was very lucky to go and work with colleagues in Denmark at the University of Aalborg, Professor John Rasmussen and Michael Skipper Anderson, to develop these techniques. I must say, most of my participants did have arms and lungs and hearts and skin, so this is perhaps a slightly simplified version of those that took part. But the real learning here was that we were able to characterize how people moved and how that might affect the way the joint functions during different activities of daily living. And we combined that with how they felt, so their perception of comfort, of pain, of how they were performing different tasks in their daily life. And we were able to then project what it looks like to be healthy in terms of their joint function and their perception, and what it then meant to be how their recovery was then characterized post-operation. And the big thing from the PhD was really to describe the fact that most people's function after their operation was determined about how fit they were before they had their knee replacement. And actually much of the field since my PhD has really moved towards the fact that we need to get people fit and healthy before they undergo lots of different types of operations. So prehab is now a much more common place in terms of how we support people in their functional recovery. So hopefully the PhD was part of that narrative in terms of supporting that sort of activity. But what I really learned from the PhD as a whole is PhDs can be lots of fun. We had some nice times in Vegas. We had some great times in Leiden. And I was part of this research consortia with the University of Denver and Kansas University, where we all shared data, information, and the sum of our parts made the whole in terms of the research impact. So I was learning those early lessons of how to bring together lots of different research to make it more enjoyable, but also to really generate the maximum impact from your work. So after the PhD, I thought, well, I definitely need to stay here. And Maria was very kind enough to line up a project back in health sciences, but this time looking at dodgy shoulders. So I had a lot of personal experience here. Being an avid tennis player, my shoulder is falling apart. So the opportunity to do a postdoc looking at how we support the recovery of shoulder injury was really attractive. And a great opportunity to come back with Maria and her band of merry men and women back into health sciences and really sort of use what I'd learned in my PhD to help inform my postdoc. And a bit like with the PhD, it was much around tracking how the shoulder moves when muscles were active, and we could start looking at how people were different in terms of those with something called shoulder impingement, so where the shoulder struggles to elevate, versus those that didn't have that condition. And we worked very closely with a lady called Sarah Mottram, and Sarah was a physio who for years had been treating people with an approach called motor control. So training the muscles to move in a specific way in order to relieve someone's symptoms. But we had no evidence that the intervention or the physio worked. So a lot of what we were doing is trying to unpick the mechanisms by which that intervention worked. And here's a slide where you can see how the shoulder blade elevates up and down, and we could overlap when the muscles were active. So we could actually see how by retraining the shoulder in a very specific way, we could turn those muscles back on, but really importantly then influence someone's functional ability to raise their arm, play sport, and take part in their daily activity. And so we had a fantastic project called MoCats and some wonderful outcomes with many of our patients. One of which recently came forwards in the last 6 months to tell us that since doing MoCats, he has gone from not being able to pick up a cup of tea to becoming world pole sport champion at the age of 60. So hasn't Paul done well after the intervention? So whenever you think a project's finished and all the impact's been made, keep going back to those that took part in your study and see where they've gone now. Fantastic to see Paul with all of his various ability, but he still credits the fact that he can do pole sport to taking part in our study, which is absolutely wonderful. Unfortunately, we didn't get the main study funded. So Maria and I went for a much bigger clinical trial. Let's get MoCats out to everyone. But as is the way in research, we weren't fortunate enough to get the money in that instance. So as that time, I was in between jumping off to Australia, going to a new institution, finally leaving Southampton at some point. But along came a great friend and colleague, Professor Dan Bader. So Dan was brought down from Queen Mary in London as the university's, or one of the university's big hitters. So they were bringing down these eminent professors, setting them up with nice research facilities, and giving each professor a postdoc, someone who can help drive their research forwards. And Dan and I hit it off straight away, where as soon as we met each other, we had a love for sport and culture and everything in between alongside our research. And he said to me, "Come and join me in skin health, Pete. It's one of the most collegiate and collaborative fields. We need more physios, and you could make a real name for yourself." And luckily, someone like Dan really knew what he was talking about. What he didn't tell me is that I'd be moving to the hospital, and that in the hospital, we had one office and 2 labs that were completely empty. Cardboard boxes, nothing else. So we had to basically build and grow the research group from scratch. But actually, that was a wonderful opportunity for me. All of that learning in terms of understanding what it takes to build something from the ground up, and all the trials and tribulations of getting your research off the ground. A fantastic opportunity, and to do it with someone like Dan, a real touch of luck. But I didn't know a huge amount about skin health. I'd gone from knee replacements to shoulders to skin. So I'm working my way around the body gradually. But actually what Dan was really interested in is how skin can be damaged. And damaged when you expose the skin to things like pressure, so pushing on the skin surface, shear, so when you rub the skin, and when you expose the skin to temperature and moisture, you can actually damage the skin in many contexts. And Dan's been involved in the field of pressure ulcer research for a long time. So these pressure ulcers are these chronic wounds that can cause pain, they can cause a lot of social impact as well, and it's such an area of research that, we could find solutions to prevent these chronic wounds from happening. So with Dan, we were saying, okay, let's attack this problem head on, let's do some good research. But what was really challenging is actually when you're starting from scratch, getting funding in the first instance is really hard. So we spent the first couple of years flying research applications out, trying to find grant funding. And it was only in 2014 that we started to strike a bit of gold. And our first really big bit of research that gave us our kind of unique selling point as a group was a network grant called Medical Devices and Vulnerable Skin. And here we were trying to look at different devices that get attached to the body and how they might impact on local skin health. And we set up a network that was funded by the Engineering Research Council and the National Institute for Health Research. And having done a successful early phase of that, we then got a plus, and so on and so on. But that was the little acorn, to steal a phrase from Hannah, that really enabled us to grow our research. And if you think about it, devices are used in lots of different circumstances across health and social care. We're all used to wearing devices now. Has everyone got a smartwatch or something attached to them? We're all interfacing with various devices these days. But actually, a lot of devices that are used in different care settings are just not fit for purpose. They're made out of pretty crude plastic materials. They're often very generic in design. And unsurprisingly, they can cause problems with your skin. So we're really interested in how we can improve those materials, how we can improve the way we attach the device, and how can we minimize, it keeps on skipping, some of these forces that we know could create these pressure ulcers or the pressure damage. But we know we're also working with some really vulnerable populations. So if you think of a neonate who might be 23, 24 weeks gestation, their skin is paper thin, and they might have 10 to 15 devices strapped to their body during an intensive care stay. So you've got a really complicated set of both human factors and device factors to think about. And without going into too much of the gory stuff for Theo and Ada, these are some of the wounds that can be caused by devices. So you can get things like stump sores from someone who has limb loss. You can get wounds caused by ventilation masks. You can get probes and various different lines that might cause damage. But you see them quite common in practice. And the real problem you have is actually, yes, it's a wound, but it can have a huge impact on the individual. So we've done quite a lot of work with patient and public advisory groups. And we've spoken a lot to parents, for example, in neonatal units. And with permission, this is Alfie, who was a 24-week gestation neonate. So he had scarring on his back from where his hand was caught behind him with a saturation probe, so it actually burnt his back. When he had a ventilation tube, his vocal cords were broken and they were scarred, so he could no longer use his vocal cords properly, which meant he aspirated or fluid got into his lungs. His NG tube put marks on the back of his head. He had an injury from his sort of CPAP mask or his ventilation mask on his cheeks. He had skin breakdown on a stoma, which is where you basically have a bag as your intestines. And even the plastic bracelet that carried his name tag impinged on his skin and gave him damage on the skin. So one individual, multiple harms, things that just shouldn't be happening. So that's at the individual level in terms of what we were seeing with these device injuries. If we zoom out, you can also see a lot of damage at that wider scale. So our colleagues in Nebraska showed that of all the pressure ulcers they recorded in a hospital, over a third of them were caused by devices. And if you wear devices, you are nearly 2.5 more times likely of getting a pressure ulcer of any kind. And it's not just the individual impact, it's also the cost as well. So the cost of having these wounds and these damage was hugely detrimental. And these are just from some of the isolated studies, because unfortunately there was no international consensus on how we measure, monitor, and report these device-related pressure ulcers. So one of the first things we did as a team is actually work with a PhD student, Eva Crunden, to create international consensus on how these things are reported. So we did something called a Delphi study, where you reach out to lots of experts in the field. We created a list of reporting items, and subsequently NHS England at the time changed the way we report pressure ulcers, so now device-related pressure ulcers have a completely different reporting tool. So we're managing to generate the data to really inform how big the problem is. But from Dan and I's perspective, as sort of physios and bioengineers, we were really interested in the solutions. So one of the solutions is, well, if the designs are rubbish, because most of them are based on an average face shape for a mask, for example, and it has a small, medium, and large, actually we need to really do some good science to improve the way these devices are made. There's also some much better materials out there. They don't need to be made out of these horrible stiff plastics and silicones. Let's put some decent materials into the skin interface to help prevent the problem. We can also help people select the right device. So rather than guessing, well, I think you're a medium or a large, how can we create technology which actually informs us, well, for this person, this is the right device for you. And we can create technology at the device interface. So we can monitor things like pressure and shear so that we can help people to self-manage their devices so they know when to take the device off or to give themselves a rest. So I'll go through a couple of examples of this type of research just to tell you a bit about what we did through the network. So the first area I'll touch upon is prosthetic socket design. So here you have someone who's got limb loss, and they might have had limb loss through trauma, through congenital problems, but more commonly now through peripheral vascular disease. So those with diabetes are at high risk of things like limb loss. But you've got a major problem where you've got skin and soft tissue, which previously isn't used to taking lots of load. Suddenly you're sticking a socket on it and asking the tissue to take a whole body weight's worth of load. And you've got a situation now where you have some expert prosthetists that fit a socket that's very bespoke to the individual, but it takes a long time to find that solution. And a lot of the historical methods they use to make the sockets means that that information gets lost. So they make these sort of rectified sockets from plaster cast, and then you smash the cast and you've lost all that information. So we think there could be better opportunities for technology to help that design process. So here's a young man with very dark hair. And another young man, Alex, who's got more hair than he has now. But we did our PhDs together, me and Alex, and we said, well, we're going to carry on working together because we find that a lot of fun. And we were really interested in how we can characterize the shape of limbs. And a bit like some other projects we've heard tonight, this all started with quite a small pump priming project. So a little bit of money for us to work between disciplines, and we really wanted to basically characterize limb shape, limb technologies, and how we can improve socket design. And so Alex and I started some early work within sockets and started to publish papers related to technologies and understanding of socket design. But little did we know that actually, whilst we were developing all that work, there were some really big international calls to help provide prosthetic services. And one of those areas was in Cambodia. So they have a very high amputee rate because of what happened in the 70s, where a lot of landmine victims lost their limbs. And just so happened, as me and Alex were developing a technology, a global challenge call came out to say, can you help us develop technologies in Cambodia? So we lucked out again, and we managed to secure a global challenges project to go out to Cambodia. But what's really interesting in Cambodia is the use case. So these are individuals with limb loss who are farming paddy fields. They're fixing bikes on the streets, and they're walking up to 10 to 20,000 steps a day on $25 International Red Cross components. Okay? So you've got this population of individuals with limb loss with exceptional needs. Some of them need to climb trees for a living. So you're needing to find solutions within the prosthetic technology to enable people to do a variety of different activities for their living. And so we put together a crack team of researchers to address the problem. Alex, who led the project, Maggie Donovan-Hall, who's one of our clinical psychologists, myself, and Cheryl Metcalf. But we wanted to try and identify technologies and solutions that were sustainable in the context of Cambodia. And me and Alex went into it thinking, we're going to scan limbs and 3D print some sockets. And that'll be the solution, as was our naivety. But of course, as soon as we got to Cambodia to do some of the early work, we soon realized prosthetists like Bo, who had been working for 20 years, could start with the initial size of the limb. They could rectify the socket with their thumbs, and they could produce a socket within 2 hours for $5. So are you, Mr. Researcher, coming over here with your technologies? Put that away. Absolute rubbish. We've already got the solutions to our sockets. So actually, by listening to our colleagues in the Cambodian School of Prosthetics and Orthotics, we completely reshaped the project. And what they really needed is to help them share data across their clinics. They had 4 clinics across Cambodia with a really transient population. So people would pop up in one clinic, then they'd come to a different clinic, and where everything was hard copy, they had to repeat the same assessments again and again. No way of sharing information, sharing data. We needed to help them support some of the componentry. So a big challenge they had was their components used to wear out all the time, but individuals wouldn't present back to clinic because they couldn't afford to take a day off work to get their limbs changed. And really importantly, for our colleagues in the CSPO, they were funded by the Nippon Foundation, they were funded by, at the time, USAID, and by Cambodia itself in terms of social care provision. But they were constantly having to justify their existence, even though they were providing the most amazing, valuable source of care for their community. So actually what we really needed to do is help them evidence the impact that they were making. And so what we were able to do through our research is demonstrate, by mining their data they had available at their clinics, all of the different types of provision that they provided across the whole community in Cambodia. We were able to show how long each prosthesis lasted for, how often an individual would come back, and we were able to put little actimetry sensors in the prosthesis and demonstrate how much people were doing on these things. We had cleaners in their 70s doing 20,000 steps a day on a $25 prosthesis. This is an amazing service that they're providing. And so working with our colleagues in CSPO and then subsequently lobbying with representatives in Cambodia, we managed to get the provision of prosthetics and orthotics off social care and into healthcare within Cambodia, greatly increasing people's access to the devices, as well as giving the clinic the recognition it deserved for the amazing service it provided. But that's probably a long way from where we thought we were going to come in and 3D print sockets. So again, thinking about kind of listening to the experts in the room, identifying the cultural and social sort of nuances of research was so important. And meanwhile, back in the UK, we had this very up-and-coming intern, Josh, who started with us way back in, 2016. And Josh was really keen, again, to develop technologies in the field. And we were particularly interested in the UK context of how do we characterize limb shape and how do we use it to help inform socket design. And Josh was so keen, he wanted to spin out after his PhD. So Alex and I were fully engaged in trying to help Josh make a success of his business. But it all started with me and Alex in that little room scanning limbs. So we scanned lots of limbs because we really wanted to understand how diverse people's limb shape were. And actually that helps to enable us to understand what modes of variation people have in their limbs. And then if we were to design a socket, what sort of things do we need to take into account when we're thinking about socket design? So all of that early work that Alex and I did really fed into how Josh's company was looking at the challenge of designing new sockets, but thinking about it from a population-based point of view, not just a single patient point. And what we managed to come up with is some software that effectively characterizes the limb. Let's see if the video works. So it means you can scan a limb. You can then sit down with your patient and you can co-design their socket. So if someone says, oh, my leg's really sore on the outside of my bony bit and my fibula, you can in real time change the design characteristics of the socket and co-design the final sort of version that the patient goes home with. So you're now creating the opportunity for the prosthetist to be really engaged with the patient during that design process, but you're also able to save all that information. So rather than the plaster cast being smashed and you losing all the information, you've now got a digital footprint to help people with their sockets in the future. Now, Josh has then gone on to great guns. So I won't claim much credit for this. Josh has managed to win awards at the American Orthotic and Prosthetic Association. He's just signed a contract with the Veterinary Association in the States to help them design their sockets for their veterans. And we're doing more and more work with our clinical colleagues to refine how they might use the software, how that might help inform both current practice, but also training the next generation of prosthetists as well. And we hope that Josh will carry on going great guns in the future. The other one I'll touch upon in terms of devices is some work we did during the pandemic. So here we had a situation where we suddenly had a load of people wearing masks. And you look back at videos from 2000 to 2022, and everyone's wearing a mask. And doesn't that seem really unfamiliar now? But at the time, one of the greatest calls was actually keeping our patients, but also our health and care professionals safe. So lots of clinicians were wearing these filtering face masks, or FFP3 masks. And most of them were these single-use things. So you popped them on the face, strapped them up, went out and saw your patients. You could tell they worked because my good wife was a physiotherapist during the pandemic, working with COVID patients, and didn't get COVID for the 2 years she was there. And it was only when we went to France, after the pandemic was over, did we catch COVID. So it shows they were effective. But there's a problem here, guys. PPE is neither personal nor protective for particular genders, and we're talking about women here. But it's also not protective for non-Caucasians. And the reason for that is that the European standards that these devices are made from use the average white male face shape to design the mask. And that's all based on a 1970s cohort of pilots from America who were all white and male. So when you suddenly give a mask to a Filipino nurse working in the NHS who's a female, guess what? They don't fit, okay? So we had this huge issue. And when they don't fit, the temptation is to get the straps and tighten it up. I'm just going to put this on my face as hard as I possibly can to try and achieve the seal because the mask doesn't fit me properly. And so you would have seen perhaps some of these images that were making their way around social media of these poor healthcare professionals with great big red marks all over their faces because they've been on a 12-hour shift wearing a mask that doesn't fit them properly. And we were getting redness, pressure ulcers, rashes, spots, the whole 9 yards. People were really struggling wearing these things. So we were funded for a project called Be Safe. This was through the Engineering Research Council again, to try and improve the design and fitting of these masks, to try and help our colleagues who were basically part of the RPE teams that were going out and identifying masks for individuals, and to work with those standards organizations and our national bodies to change practice. Because there will be another pandemic at some point, and we need to learn our lessons from issues like this. And so part of our work involved creating a method by which you could use an iPad or an iPhone, scan an individual's face, and then because we had a bank of different respirators, we could then predict which mask fit for any given person. So rather than that guesswork of going, oh, I think you're a medium 3M mask, well, actually, you've got a piece of technology that will tell you straight away what's the most likely device that will fit. And we could also start to characterize, well, actually, which devices do we need in stock in order to meet the population's need? Because there was a point during the pandemic where they literally would have 1 or 2 masks in stock, and most of the time that didn't fit lots of individuals. And we worked really closely with NHS England and Department of Health and Social Care to support them in selecting 12 new respirators that were manufactured in the UK by the end of the pandemic, which could fit 95% of people that needed them. And we also managed to work with NHS England to provide guidelines on how often you should wear the mask and how you can protect skin health. So hopefully really tangible things that can be taken forwards next time we have a pandemic, hopefully not for a while. So there's some examples of some of the device work, but perhaps it would be important for me to talk a bit more about the secret sauce of how successful research, education, enterprise comes together. So does anyone in the room think, what's the thing that academics are best at? What would you say we're really good at? Writing long papers, thanks, William. I mean, for me, what I feel I'm best at is just being a massive failure. I fail all the time, but that is making me into who I am, okay? And in academia, we get rejected all the time, right? The grant's not good enough, the paper could do this, but actually failure is such a big part of personal growth. And I get so many of my undergrad physio students saying, oh, Pete, I'm just really scared of failing the exam. It's okay, fail it, learn something from it, grow as part of it. Failure is the step to success for me. So a potted history of failure very quickly. I failed my driving test 3 times. Sorry, Mum and Dad, that probably cost you a few quid at the time. Plymouth is a terrible place to drive, okay? But look at me now. Driving around, perfectly happy, a relatively blemish-free record, apart from my father-in-law's beloved Mazda 6. Apologies for writing that off, Phil, but otherwise doing fine. I didn't get my biology A level either. Didn't get into uni first time. Had to sit and retake my biology. Found that a really hard and annoying exam to do, much harder than maths. But actually, that was the making of me because I spent my gap year learning how to be a chef, and now I love cooking. And I spent 6 months at Totnes Community Hospital, which reinforced the fact that I absolutely love physiotherapy, and it was the profession for me. So failing biology was the best thing that happened. When I got to uni, oh dear, end of the first year, I failed my practical exam. And at the time in our exam, we had to do moving and handling, which meant hoisting someone from the bed to the chair. And if you didn't cross those straps, sorry, that's a safety fail. So my wonderful friend and colleague, Julian, asked me to drive from South Devon to Southampton, do a hoist with cross straps, and he said, thanks, Pete, you can drive back home again now. But if anyone is in need of an emergency hoist, rest assured, I'm crossing those straps and I'll be safe as houses when I do move you. And of course, in research. Failure is part of our daily activity. I had my first PhD paper rejected 3 times, but 100+ papers later, I'm still getting papers rejected, or with major comments. But actually, on reflection, every time someone has something to say about my research, it gets better. You put it back in, you improve it. That's how we all get better in life. So that's the slightly negative connotation, but into a positive. But I think for me, the thing that really makes a difference in my working life is the village, right? It takes a village to succeed, and it's the people that you get to work with at this fine institution. So this is an example of one of my current projects. So this is called Seamless. We're developing technologies that go into the community to help people who have limited mobility in the bed and chair. And I've got professors of nursing, I've got consultant tissue viability nurses, a realist evaluation expert. I have Stephen Duckworth, who chairs our patient and public advisory panel. I've got an expert in thermal physiology, thanks Davide, bioengineers, social scientists, and the whole 9 yards. Just an absolute dream team of people from different professional backgrounds and disciplines, all coming together on a common purpose of trying to make a technology that improves people's lives. So creating and managing and leading teams is an absolute pleasure. But of course, I've learned a lot from those that came before. And someone far smarter than me said, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and these are some of my giants. Maria, maybe not giant in height, but giant in life. Mark, likewise, not giant in height, but definitely giant in life. The late, great Professor Dan Bader, who unfortunately passed quite shortly after his retirement, but has had a profound impact on my career. This fine-looking Dutch man here, Kees Oemens, who has always provided external mentorship and support. And then people in my current life, Mandy Fader, Kathy Bowen, Stephen Duckworth, Lizette Schoenhoven, Bashir Laloid, and the fantastic Lisa Roberts, who somehow managed to juggle 1,500 things simultaneously whilst having a whopping smile on her face constantly, and is an absolute inspiration to us all. But I've been very fortunate to work with the people I have, and they have definitely shaped me. And the thing that I take from each of these individuals is it isn't just the investment at the professional level. They've all taken time to invest in me at the personal level. They've got to know me, who I am, who my family is, what are my hobbies and interests. And by doing so have just meant that I've wanted to work for them. I've wanted to strive, I've wanted to do better for them. And that's something that I take forward in everything I do. It'd be remiss to not include my village of postdocs, early and mid-career researchers, all of whom have massively enriched both my work and my personal life as well. And, you know, postdocs past and present have just always strived to do as much as they can for the group, for myself, and everyone around. So thank you to each and every one of those individuals who have taken part in projects and have been part of our research activity. Likewise, our village of PhD students. Look at all of those lovely people. Fantastic village of PhDs and interns that have come and worked in the group and been part of our skin health or skin sensing activity. You'll note the chaps on the top right-hand corner are holding hands with my son, Theo. So they were interns from Technical University in Eindhoven. So they came here for 3 months. And not only did I give them a well-rounded education in research, but I also introduced them to parenthood. So there they are in Bournemouth Beach, walking my son down. You can't say I don't give people a well-rounded experience. But of course, when your village is growing, you need someone to step in and help you run the village. So with Dan's retirement and unfortunate passing, we had to find someone with fresh energy, fresh ideas, and fresh locks. There he is. I'll let that run a bit, but there may have been a time, once upon a time ago, probably a long time ago, where I might have been considered, self-proclaimed, the young buck of health sciences. until my Sicilian friend Davide comes along and completely takes over that mantle. But Davide's a special individual. On a professional and personal level, he came in with energy, ideas, enthusiasm, and he just slotted in perfectly and has enabled us to grow as a group. So thank you, Davide, very much. It would be remiss of me to not include a special mention to my colleagues in education. So research is obviously one big part of my life, but my colleagues in education have been absolutely fantastic in mentoring me, supporting me through my personal development. JP, Rob, Ruth, Linz, Debbie, and the whole team, you know exactly who you are. They've been absolutely wonderful. The physio program when I started here in 2004 was one of the best in the country. The physio program in 2026 is the best in the country. We run the best program. We have done for the last decade. It is immensely proud as a team that we can offer that to the next generations of physiotherapists. But beyond the rankings, which are a mixture of lots of different things, the reason why it's the best program in the country is because of this lot. And this is my village of undergrads and MSc students. Absolutely amazing graduates that come out of Southampton who are already nationally world beaters. And they do so with the same energy and enthusiasm that we all give to them, and they give it right back in spades. And they're one of the major inspirations for our teaching and education focus. And I tried to work out how many students have graduated since I started teaching. I think it's about 500. As the program's grown, hopefully that number will grow with it. And then finally, just making sure that I acknowledge my village at home. Danny, Theo, Ada Chops, thank you for being so understanding and so supportive when I've got to go off to Cambodia or do all these work-related trips. Thank you for your unwielding support. The Wurzels, Mum and Dad, Age and Steve brothers, and all of our lovely nieces, nephews, and everything in between, thank you for your support. They still have no idea why I'm still at uni. Hopefully Mum and Dad now know I'm at least paid to be here, and I'm doing some work as part of that. I've got a whole field of woods as well, so thank you Phil and Sharon, Bill and Mandy, Sam and Mike, constantly giving support, often bailing me out and doing school runs on a regular basis. Thank you so much. And of course, my friends that keep me incredibly grounded. You're not Prof Pete, you're Prof Pee-wee. Or as Arlo would say, Prof Poopy Pants. And it's your friends and your colleagues that will keep you exactly where you need to be. There's been a whole host of people that have given us support over the years for funding, and that includes both from councils but also industry as well. And long may the work continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was amazing, and I'm sure you'll agree what a fantastic and inspirational inaugural we've had. We have the opportunity for some questions, and Steve is around with a microphone. Would anyone like to open us up? I do know sneakily, because I climbed the stair with her, that there is a slightly personal question from Anne Sophie, but she might need to speak to you about it. They've got a swollen knee.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Pete. Have you got any plans for any future research?
Yes, lots. So yeah, we're blessed with a few different projects at the moment. So we're still looking at the human factors of using technology in homes to help people be more mobile and prevent their pressure ulcers. And with Davide, we're currently looking at the mechanisms of skin and soft tissue damage and hopefully translating that into things called point of care diagnostic systems. So can we pop something on the skin and determine how vulnerable it might be to get damaged so we can intervene nice and early? So there's a whole mixture of projects from lab all the way through to very applied stuff in care settings. But as with always, we go where there are opportunities, and we're very lucky to have a mixture.
Thank you. And thanks for a lovely presentation as well.
Thanks, Pete. Your experience of kind of having your plan of what you thought was going to happen when you went out to Cambodia and then really realizing that it needed a complete redesign, how has that changed the way that you approach new research projects now?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think we're probably later to the game in co-production, but co-production has been around for a while within healthcare settings and healthcare research. So with this latest project called Seamless, actually the first thing we did was something called a realist evaluation, where we went into people's homes and asked them their experiences with using the technology. And that then shaped the whole rest of the project. So often we have these ideas that we cook up in our heads and then we want to throw it and see if it sticks in healthcare. Well, actually, I've now learned to shape a project in that we're actually going to go and ask those questions from the get-go, work with our patient and public advisors, and really think broadly about what technology works for whom and in what circumstances and why, and really drilling into those sort of important nuances in how you bring a technology to healthcare is so important, rather than thinking about the technical bit of what the tech looks like. So still learning, though. I think that we can always improve in that context.
Revenge. No, it's fine. Thanks, Pete. No, on a serious note, I always find it interesting, to look at your work, because I think you're a brilliant example of that bridging, the clinical practice with hardcore fundamental science, which is fantastic. I'm wondering, across all these projects, where do you think, or which one do you think has been the biggest challenge, or what challenge remains in really impacting that clinical practice, even if you know that the science is going to work?
Yeah, so I think in health and social care in general, we face huge challenges in terms of a growing need for care in lots of different settings, a workforce who is at that very edge of the limit of what they can do, and then somewhere trying to squeeze in technology, AI, and innovation in the middle. And actually a real challenge we face is, how do we do so in a way in which it engages those that are going to use the technology, it encourages participation from everyone, but also ensures that the technology is fit for purpose and improves the way we offer care. And actually a lot of the time we find, we had a recent meeting where head of NHS Digital was saying, it's okay, we've got the NHS app, and the app's going to change everything. And a GP stood up and said, I can't even use the app, let alone my 80-year-old patient. This thing's completely unfit for purpose. So I think the challenge for all of us is actually making solutions that are relevant and will actually work in practice settings. So a lot of what we're doing now is paring back some of the technology and actually trying to think really meaningfully what's going to work and where.
That was great. Just wondered about two things, because you were doing lots of things around muscles, and then you went to skin. So I was wondering about whether you might go back to that, or is there still an interest there? And also, within all of that, what is the really difficult thing to uncover for you? So not so much the implementation, but sort of a research question that's very related to the physiotherapy.
Yep, sure. Well, I mean, our work, although it's in skin health, actually includes fat and muscle and everything in between. So when you compress tissue, you compress tissue as a whole, and actually you can get injuries that start in the muscles. So we have done quite a bit of work that's also looked at different muscle markers as well. And then sort of coming back towards more physio applications, well, actually, assistive technology is a very broad topic. And that's why I chose that as a title for my chair, is actually it gave me the opportunity to work in lots of different domains within rehabilitation. So yeah, the intention is very much to try and look at assistive technology holistically. So that might mean beds and chairs, but it might also mean prosthetics, orthotics, assistive devices for musculoskeletal health. So I'm hoping by creating the opportunities, I can go back to some of the areas that I visited before.
Hi, Pete. Thank you. Brilliant presentation. I think of all the amazing work you've done, what resonated with me was the driving test one with the car going back and forth, because that's like me. But thank you for being very real. I mean, I think, because I'm a PhD student, and you see the successes with anyone in life, but it's the journey to get there that most people don't see. And I think you're obviously very positive, and it's great. But thank you for sharing with us your setbacks and your disappointments. And I just wanted to ask, on a personal level, you have a great village and a great network, which is brilliant, but how did you yourself deal with those rejections? And I mean, to have failed your A-level, you were very young, but to pick yourself up and do a gap year, and then even going through, how did you deal with those personal rejections?
So I guess I'm blessed in just having a very blind view of, I'm just going to do that again, and I'm going to try again until I pass, until I succeed. So I guess the benefit for me is I don't dwell on rejection or failure, but actually I try and learn from it. And actually that's what makes us better, right? Is to think, well, what can I do better next time, and how can I improve myself or the work that I'm doing? So I've never let failure sit on me at all. It all tends to wash off like Teflon. And then I just go again until someone says, yes, Pete, you can carry on doing that now. So, and I think all academics have a huge amount of perseverance and hard work, right? That's a big part of the secret sauce, is actually just really persevering and sort of making sure that if you think it's a good idea, someone will fund it at some point, and you will be able to realize that ambition.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think we've got any questions online, but thank you so much to you, Pete. Hopefully you see a little hint of why we are so incredibly proud of this amazing researcher. And just to add that the comment about the pub and the undergraduate business, it was Maria Stokes that told me this, and I'm now thinking that I know why, having seen the picture of you on the table. So it was her. Anyway, thank you very much for that very inspirational talk.